He was barely a month old, a tiny golden retriever puppy, cream-colored fur still damp from his mother's last touch. But she wasn't there anymore. He was in the back of a black SUV, speeding across a bridge in San Francisco. The car didn't slow down. It didn't hesitate. The door opened. And then, without warning, they threw him. Not placed, not dropped. Thrown. He spun in the air, small legs flailing, his cry lost in the roar of traffic and wind. The water below was dark and cold, waiting. He hit it hard, too small to swim, too young to understand. Just a baby, left to drown, no mother, no warmth, no chance. No one saw it happen. No one noticed the splash. No one, until something did. What follows is a story of unthinkable cruelty, of silence broken by a heartbeat, and of a bond that formed in the most unlikely place. It's about pain and rescue and love that doesn't ask for anything in return. Before we begin, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments, and if you believe no life, no matter how small, deserves to be thrown away, hit subscribe. This story, you won't forget it. San Francisco had always worn a second skin of fog, but this morning it clung to the water like a sorrow that refused to lift. The sky was a pale bruise, the kind that hinted the sun was somewhere, just not for here, not yet. Out on the bay, where the waters breathed slow beneath the weight of rusted bridges and forgotten promises, a small aluminum skiff drifted just below one of the city's lesser-known spans. Not the Golden Gate, that was for postcards and tourists. This one was older, quieter, and in its own way, more tired. Hank Rowley, 47, hunched over the edge of the boat, his hands calloused and cracked from decades of working jobs that no one remembered existed. His wiry frame was wrapped in layers of flannel and a waterproof coat that had long since given up being waterproof. His beard was gray-streaked and uneven, his eyes a tired blue, the color of faded denim left too long in the sun. Hank had once been a metal worker, welding scaffolding for high-rises until a fall shattered more than just his back. The pain had dulled, but the bitterness hadn't. These days he worked with the river, not for it. He dragged forgotten things out of the water. Tires, shopping carts, sometimes bones, always garbage. He didn't complain. He didn't talk much at all. He lived in a rented two-room duplex wedged between a liquor store and a pawn shop in Potrero Hill. People walked past him without looking, just the way he liked it, until the silence broke. It happened around 7:10 a.m. Hank had just pulled a rusted lawn chair from the water when a sharp screech of tires drew his gaze upward. Above him, on the bridge, a black SUV slowed. Not stopped, but slowed enough to be deliberate. The rear passenger window rolled down. Hank squinted, his hand shielding his eyes from the diffuse gray light. Then, he saw something small, a bundle of golden fur, wriggling, get tossed out into the air like trash. There was no sound but wind. No scream, just the sudden, sickening reality of motion. The creature tumbled, limbs flailing in panic. Hank's brain, sluggish from cold and years of routine, took a heartbeat too long to register. Then he moved. The splash was soft but final, the kind of sound you heard when something living hit water and didn't know how to fight it. Hank dropped the chair, grabbed the oars, and dug into the water with the desperation of a man trying to rewind fate. His arms burned. The skiff lunged forward. He scanned the ripples for signs, movement, bubbles, anything. Then he saw it. A flash of pale gold just beneath the surface, caught in the current, struggling weakly. Hank reached down, nearly tipping the boat, and plunged both arms into the icy water. His fingers caught fur, slippery, soaked, impossibly soft. He hauled the small body up, cradling it against his chest. It was a puppy, barely old enough to stand on its own. A golden retriever, likely no more than a month old, its eyes still glassy with confusion and terror. Its tiny frame shivered violently, its heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird. Hank held it closer, muttering something that sounded like a prayer, though he hadn't set foot in a church in over 20 years. He checked for wounds. There was no blood, but bruises were already forming along the small ribs. The pup had likely hit part of the bridge or something in the water before Hank reached it. Its front paw twitched once, then fell limp again. "Hang on," Hank whispered. "You're not done yet. not like this. Back on the shore, he wrapped the pup in an old fishing towel and climbed out of the boat. His knees ached, his back screamed, but he didn't care. He moved fast, faster than he had in years, toward his truck, an old Chevy with more rust than paint. The puppy whimpered once, so faint it was almost imagined. Hank didn't have a plan. He never did. But the vet clinic was 6 blocks away, and he knew they opened early. He didn't know who owned the SUV. He didn't know why anyone would throw a dog from a bridge. But he knew this much. That little creature hadn't chosen to fall. Someone made that choice for it. And now, someone had to choose to care. The sky was still the color of old ash by the time Hank reached his duplex, and the wind carried a bite that made even the seagulls fly lower, their wings dragging through the chilled air like half-forgotten prayers. Hank parked his rust-bitten Chevy behind a row of overgrown hedges that hadn't been trimmed in years. His small home sat wedged between 2 abandoned warehouses along the edge of Pier 26, a gray, crumbling structure with flaking paint and a sagging porch that creaked with every breath of wind. A wind chime made from soda-can tabs clinked faintly above the doorway. It wasn't beautiful, but it was his. In his arms, the bundle of damp fur stirred. The puppy hadn't made a sound during the drive, but Hank could feel the slight, rhythmic twitch of its body, breathing, still fighting. He unlocked the door and nudged it open with his boot. Inside, the house smelled of river silt, oil, and old coffee. The furniture was mismatched, salvaged. A stained recliner faced an ancient television that hadn't worked in years. A faded photo sat crooked on the mantel, a young man in a welding mask, smiling beside a red-haired woman, their arms wrapped around a boy, no older than 10. Hank didn't look at the photo. Instead, he carried the pup to the bathroom, set it gently in the sink, and turned on the lukewarm tap. The dog flinched at first, but soon relaxed as the water ran over its filthy coat. Gently, Hank rubbed away the river grime, revealing soft, cream-colored fur beneath. The pup was a golden retriever for sure, with big paws that promised it would grow large, and eyes that were too expressive for its size. It watched him the whole time, never whining, just breathing. "You look like you've been through hell," Hank muttered, then paused. "Goldie, that's what I'll call you." It wasn't poetic, but it felt right. He dried the pup with an old flannel shirt and carried it into the living room. He folded a thick towel into a box and placed Goldie in it, along with a worn blanket and a rusted tin dish filled with warm milk. The puppy sniffed, sipped once, and then collapsed against the fabric, fast asleep. Hank sank into the recliner and stared. Something in his chest shifted, a movement he hadn't felt in years, not since before his back broke, not since his wife, Margot, walked out with their son, Danny, and never looked back. He had deserved it, he'd told himself. The anger, the drinking, the shouting when the pain wouldn't let up. But he had never learned how to fill the silence they left behind. Until now, maybe. Later that morning, he left Goldie sleeping and walked 2 blocks to the corner store, a yellowing place called Benny's Mart that sold more beer than groceries. Behind the counter stood Benny himself, a tall, wiry man in his 60s with a hooked nose and a permanent frown etched across his thin lips. Benny used to be a bookie, some said, but these days he just listened to the radio and sold expired crackers. "You look like you saw a ghost," Benny grunted as Hank walked in. "Found a dog," Hank replied simply, grabbing a can of formula and a bag of rice. "Puppy. Fell from a bridge." Benny blinked. "What kind of psycho throws a dog off a bridge?" Hank shrugged. "World's full of them." As he paid, Benny slid a can of chicken broth across the counter. "On the house, for the pup." Back home, Goldie was curled into a ball, tail twitching. Hank fed him by hand at first, careful not to rush, then sat nearby as the little dog napped. Outside, the sky remained a stubborn gray, and the house felt quieter than usual, not from absence, but something more fragile. Peace. That night, Goldie woke whimpering. Hank, who hadn't slept more than 2 hours at a time in years, jolted upright. He brought the pup into his bed, laying him on a pillow, and watched until the small chest rose and fell into sleep again. Hank didn't know why he felt the urge to protect something he didn't ask for, but maybe this was the kind of thing that didn't need a reason. By the end of the week, Goldie could stand on his own. He tottered around the kitchen on oversized paws, following Hank's boots and yipping when he tripped. Hank, in return, found himself talking out loud again, not to the walls, to Goldie, telling him about the river, the people who dumped old microwaves in the water, the time he'd pulled out a scooter with a broken handlebar and thought it was a dead body. Goldie listened, ears perked, eyes wide, like he cared. And for the first time in years, Hank cooked more than just canned stew. He started walking outside more often, carrying Goldie in a canvas satchel like a proud parent. A few neighbors waved. One even asked if he was fostering. Hank shook his head. "No," he said softly, "he's mine." The morning was crisp and dry, rare for San Francisco in early spring. The fog had lifted, revealing a sky that stretched pale and cloudless above the broken rooftops and silent piers. Hank Rowley stood outside the Southside Animal Clinic, his canvas satchel slung across one shoulder, Goldie peeking out from the open top. The puppy had grown stronger over the past week, his fur fluffier, his eyes clearer. But Hank hadn't stopped worrying about the soft winces Goldie gave whenever he was lifted, or the way he trembled when touched near the ribs. The clinic was housed in a narrow brick building wedged between a dry cleaner and a shuttered bakery. The front door jingled softly as Hank pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and pine cleaner. The waiting room small and tidy, with posters about tick prevention and free spay events taped to the walls. Behind the counter sat a young woman with short auburn hair pulled back under a green scrub cap. She wore black-rimmed glasses and a look of calm efficiency that had likely been tested 100 times a day. Her name tag read Delaney. "Morning," she said, barely glancing up. "Name?" Hank hesitated. Mine's Hank. The dog's Goldie. Found him last week. He's real young." Delaney looked over the counter and caught sight of the puppy. Her eyes softened slightly. "Golden retriever?" "Think so. Somebody threw him off a bridge." That made her pause. "Jesus!" She stood and came around the desk, reaching to gently stroke the pup's head. "Well, let's see what we're working with." She led Hank into a back room where the light was bright and clean. The exam table gleamed. The vet entered a moment later, a man in his early 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and a precise way of moving. He wore a navy fleece over his scrubs and thick-soled orthopedic shoes. His name was Dr. Elias Shore, and he'd been working with animals for over 20 years. Broad-shouldered but not tall, he had a face that rarely smiled but often stared too long. He had a reputation for being clinical, no-nonsense, and deeply intolerant of anyone who treated animals poorly. Dr. Shore gave a brief nod. "This him?" Hank set the satchel down, and Goldie stumbled out, tail wagging. Dr. Shore crouched, examining him with quick, practiced movements, checking the mouth, eyes, ears. Healthy weight considering the situation. Hydration good. Muscle tone coming back. He placed Goldie on the table, gently feeling along the ribs. That's when the puppy jerked away with a sharp yelp. Shore froze. "There," he murmured. He motioned to Delaney, who handed over gloves and a small light. He pressed around Goldie's left side, then drew in a breath. "There's some bruising, but it's not from a fall." "What do you mean?" Hank asked, arms crossed. "These aren't impact wounds," Shore said. "They're too localized. Look here, small punctures, nearly healed, symmetrical." He glanced up, expression darkening. "This dog's been injected, multiple times, likely with a large gauge needle, possibly intramuscular." Hank blinked. "Injected with what?" "I don't know yet, but this wasn't casual. Whoever had this dog before knew what they were doing, and it wasn't routine vaccination. These marks are deliberate, controlled." Goldie lay still, watching them. Shore stepped back, removed his gloves. "We can do a tox panel. I'd recommend it. And a microchip scan." Delaney brought over the scanner and passed it across Goldie's shoulder blades. A beep. "He's chipped," she said. "Number registered." Shore leaned over her shoulder as she typed into a laptop. Then his face hardened. "This chip's registered to a research facility. Treston Biologicals, North Bay." Hank had never heard the name before. "Is that a shelter?" "No," Shore said, voice flat. "It's a biomedical company." The room went silent for a moment, broken only by the soft clicking of Delaney's keyboard. "They run animal trials," she said, her voice quiet. "They've had complaints before, nothing proven, but people talk." Hank stepped forward. Are you saying this puppy came from a lab? I'm saying, Shore replied, that this dog may have been part of something he wasn't supposed to survive. Goldie whimpered again, nuzzling Hank's hand. Shore looked at him. You said someone threw him off a bridge? Hank nodded. Well, Shore muttered, now we might know why. Delaney printed out the microchip registry and handed it to Hank. Her hands were steady, but her expression had shifted. Curious, concerned. We can run those tests, but they'll take a few days. In the meantime, keep him warm. Keep an eye on him. And if anyone comes asking about him, I won't be answering, Hank said quickly. Outside, the wind had picked up. The sun had vanished behind a curtain of high clouds, and a chill settled in his coat. Hank tucked the puppy back into the satchel and began walking back toward the pier. His mind churned, and not just with anger. Someone had done this. Not to just any dog, but to Goldie. Someone had wanted him gone. And now, Hank couldn't shake the feeling that saving the puppy might have put him in the path of something far bigger than he ever meant to step into. The wind had changed. Hank noticed it first in the way the trash cans rattled harder at night, and how the shadows near his porch stretched longer than they used to. The city never truly slept, but down by the docks, where the forgotten lived and the bay whispered secrets, the darkness held things deeper than silence. It started 3 nights ago. Goldie had barked at the back window around 2 a.m., low and uncertain. Not the frantic kind of barking a dog makes when it's excited or scared, but the cautious, throaty growl of something not right. Hank had gotten up, flashlight in hand, and found nothing, just the alleyway and the faint glint of light reflecting off damp concrete. But the next night, it happened again. This time, he caught a silhouette. A man, tall and lean, standing too still at the end of the alley, half obscured behind the dumpster. By the time Hank reached the door, the figure had vanished. On the 3rd night, Hank waited. He sat on the edge of the bed, Goldie nestled against his side, both of them listening. The footsteps came just after 1:45 a.m., soft, deliberate, moving past the side wall. Hank didn't bother with a flashlight this time. He slipped out the back door with a pipe in his hand, but the alley was already empty. No prints. No voice. Just that same lingering sense of being watched. Goldie wouldn't settle after that. He'd sleep in bursts, ears twitching, eyes always half open. Hank had never been the paranoid type. The world had already taken most of what he had to give. He didn't imagine it still wanted more. But something had shifted ever since he'd learned about the chip. Treston Biologicals. The kind of name that sounded legal enough, until you started asking questions. He didn't know who to call, didn't trust the police. He didn't even own a working cell phone. So, on the 4th morning, he walked back to the vet clinic with Goldie in his arms and asked to speak to Dr. Shore. The vet wasn't in, but Delaney was, and she listened carefully as Hank explained what had happened. Someone's been watching your house, she said, brushing her bangs behind one ear. That's not good. No kidding, Hank muttered. Delaney hesitated, then scribbled a name on a yellow sticky note. If you want someone who actually cares and isn't tied up with local politics, try her. She's a reporter, investigative, real pain in the ass to the people who deserve it. The name on the note was Clara Monroe. Later that day, Hank borrowed an old flip phone from Benny at the corner mart, just long enough to make one call. The number rang 4 times before it connected. Yeah, said a woman's voice, low and skeptical. Hank cleared his throat. You don't know me? Name's Hank Rowley. I got your number from a vet tech. She said you're looking into some company. Treston. Silence, then a shift in tone. I'm listening. I got a dog, Hank said. Was thrown off a bridge. Turns out he's chipped. Treston's name's on the registry. Ever since someone's been skulking near my place. Where are you? Pier 26. I live just behind the dry dock. Give me an hour. True to her word, she showed up 50 minutes later. She drove a beat-up Honda with a cracked bumper and wore a denim jacket over a black turtleneck. Her hair was deep brown and clipped into a tight bun, and her eyes were sharp, not just observant, but calculating. Clara Monroe looked about 34, with the kind of posture that didn't allow nonsense. She was tall, lean, and moved like someone who'd spent time in rooms full of liars. A long, pale scar crossed her right eyebrow, faded but visible, hinting at some past confrontation that left more than words behind. Hank let her in. Goldie trotted to greet her, sniffed her boot, then retreated behind Hank's leg. He's a baby, Hank said, still skittish. Clara knelt slowly, letting the pup sniff her hand before gently stroking his head. You said he was thrown off a bridge? Black SUV. I was on the river. Pulled him out myself. She stood and surveyed the tiny living room. And now someone's watching you. Hank nodded. Tall guy. Can't see his face, but he keeps coming back. Clara pulled out a worn leather notebook, the corners dog-eared and stained. I've been following Treston for 5 months. Nobody talks. They claim to run basic trials, vaccine research, therapy development, but their shipments don't match their reports, and too many dogs vanish off the record. I've traced 4 different shelters that had contracts with them, all missing animals. She paused, eyes narrowing. This is the first time I've had a live one. Hank looked down at Goldie, who now curled beneath the recliner, half asleep. What do you want to do? He asked. Find out what they were doing to him. Find out why they wanted him gone. Hank exhaled slowly. You think this goes high? Clara didn't answer at first, then quietly, higher than people want to admit. Before she left, she handed Hank a card. Call this burner. If you see that guy again, call me, not the cops. And Hank, keep that pup close. If they went through the trouble of trying to kill him, they might come back to finish the job. Hank watched her drive off, her taillights disappearing around the corner. The wind had picked up again, colder now. But inside the house, the air held a new current. Uncertainty, yes, but also resolve. Someone else knew the truth now, and Hank Rowley wasn't alone anymore. Hank noticed it while changing out Goldie's bedding for the 3rd time that week. The red collar, once just a strip of stained nylon with frayed stitching, caught a gleam of light as he lifted the pup. Etched faintly into the leather tag, barely visible unless viewed from the right angle, was a single character burned into the metal, the number 5. He frowned, turning the tag between his fingers. No name, no owner information. Just that one clean numeral. It hadn't meant anything to him before, but now, after the chip, the injections, the man in the alley, Clara's visit, it felt like a crack in a much larger wall. Later that day, Clara returned. She stood in the doorway, coat still zipped, hands tucked into her sleeves like she hadn't stopped moving all morning. Her brown hair was slightly windblown, and her eyes had the strange sharpness of someone who hadn't slept. Hank let her in without a word and motioned toward the collar, which sat on the table beside Goldie's food dish. That was on him when I found him, he said. Didn't notice the mark until today. Clara stepped closer, studying the tag. The moment she saw the number, her expression shifted, something between realization and alarm. That's not just a collar, she murmured. That's a catalog. She sat down, pulling out her notebook. I've been investigating a group very quietly. They work under the name Erebos Pet Solutions. Sounds harmless, but they're a shell company for a biotech firm that runs unsanctioned behavioral trials on animals, mostly dogs. Golden retrievers, shepherds, Malinois, breeds considered high potential for emotional conditioning and pain response studies. She opened her notebook to a page filled with scribbled notes and blurry photos. I traced 5 confirmed cases. Dogs marked with collars like this. Numbers 1 through 4. All were picked up in different counties. All were found dead within weeks. Massive organ failure, unexplained seizures, even suspicious accidents while in transit. Police reports went nowhere. No charges. But I kept digging. Clara tapped the photo of a young golden retriever with a 3 burned onto its collar tag. That's the 3rd. Died in a kennel in Redwood. They said it had distemper. I had a pathologist quietly check the tissue sample. It was laced with chemicals not approved for veterinary use. She looked up, her voice quieter now. Goldie is the 5th. The room fell silent except for the quiet lapping sound of Goldie drinking from a bowl across the room. Hank's jaw tightened. So you're saying he's the last one? Clara nodded. The last living one, and the first to escape. Hank sat down heavily, rubbing the back of his neck. Why number them? Why not use names? Names get remembered, numbers get filed away. Clara's tone was flat, bitter. Just then, a knock came at the door. Hank stood, stepping lightly, instinct buzzing in his spine. When he opened it, a woman stood outside, mid-50s, short and compact, with cropped silver hair and a hard face that had seen plenty. She wore jeans, a tan utility jacket, and had the cautious posture of someone who didn't expect welcome. You Hank Rowley? She asked. Yeah. She held out a thin ID. Name Sergeant Lynn Walters, SFPD, retired. I work private security now, freelance tracking mostly. Heard about you through a mutual friend at the vet clinic. Clara stood up. You talked to Delaney? She gave me your name. I've been following chatter about missing dogs in the city. Saw some things on the forums that caught my eye. Thought you might need help. Hank didn't move from the doorway. You with anyone? No, and I'm not here to spook you. But if you're housing a dog with a Treston chip and a Red 5 collar, then you're already on someone's radar. Hank let her in. Over coffee, Lynn laid out what she knew. They've been testing on dogs in underground labs for years, untraceable setups, usually near warehouses or in rented industrial spaces. I've been trying to get photographic evidence, but they move fast, and they cover their tracks better than most street-level operations. She glanced down at Goldie, who had crawled under the couch and was watching her cautiously. He's lucky to be alive. Luck had nothing to do with it, Hank said quietly. He fought. Clara turned to Lynn. We need to find the origin point. Wherever this Erebos' group held these animals, we need photos, paperwork, anything. Lynn nodded. You'll need help. I've got contacts, former K9 units, a guy who used to do digital mapping for the city. I'll reach out. As the sun dipped behind the docks, Goldie curled up between Hank's feet and fell asleep. Clara took one last look at the collar before slipping it into a small Ziploc bag. If this dog is the last link, she said softly, then they'll want him silenced. Hank didn't flinch. He looked down at the sleeping puppy, the steady rhythm of his breath rising and falling. Let him come. The days had grown heavier. The sky over the bay hung low, tinted a steely gray that never quite brightened, even at noon. Hank felt the change in the air, the way an old wound senses rain before it falls. It wasn't just the clouds. It was something more deliberate, a presence that had gone from watching to circling. That presence made itself known first to Clara. It happened late one afternoon while she was driving back from a contact in Daly City. She noticed a white panel van in her rearview mirror. Not unusual in traffic, but it appeared again at the gas station, and again as she pulled onto the street leading to her apartment in the Tenderloin. When she parked and stepped out, the van slowed, then rolled forward without stopping. Its windows were tinted pitch black. That night, an envelope was slid under her door. Inside was a photograph, grainy, taken from a distance, but unmistakable. It showed Goldie curled up beneath Hank's porch. On the back, in marker, "We know where he is." Clara didn't call the police. She called Hank. By the time she arrived at his place, her breath was short, her face pale beneath the street lamp's glow. She shoved the photo into Hank's hand. "They're watching you," she said. "Not just following. They know. They know about Goldie." Hank stared at the image for a moment. Then he looked down at the pup, who lay on a torn cushion by the heater, gently gnawing at a rope toy. "He's just a dog," Hank said, but his voice was shaking. "A baby." Clara rubbed her arms, her coat still zipped. "That's what makes him valuable." The next blow came 2 days later. Hank had gone to check his boat, something he did every other day, a habit born from years of watching thieves strip parts for copper or smash hulls just for the thrill. When he reached Pier 26, he stopped short. The boat had been ransacked. Someone had torn through the tarp cover, scattered the gear, ripped out the floor panels he used for storage. The small lockbox he kept under the seat was missing, along with a photo of his son, a rusted wrench set, and the spare leash he kept for Goldie. Nothing expensive, but personal. Back home, he didn't speak much. Clara watched him pace the living room. Even Goldie seemed to sense the tension, staying close to Hank's legs, tail down, head tilted. That night, Hank sat by the front window with a bat across his lap, and Goldie curled against his foot. But the real test came on the fourth night. It was past midnight when Goldie started whining, soft at first, then insistent. Hank rose, opened the back door, and stepped out into the alley. At first, he saw nothing. Then, just beyond the dumpster, he spotted movement. A man, hooded, tall, wearing dark jeans, stood beside a crate. Inside the crate was raw meat, glistening in the light, and a strip of cloth that looked eerily like one of Goldie's blankets. The man noticed Hank too late. Hank didn't yell. He charged. The man bolted down the alley. Hank chased, heart thudding, but age and a bad hip slowed him. He reached the crate and found a small syringe hidden beneath the meat. capped but ready. They hadn't come to scare Goldie. They'd come to take him. He brought the crate inside. Clara, who had stayed overnight, examined it carefully. "This is a trap," she said. "They were luring him. If he'd gone out alone, if you hadn't woken up—" Her voice trailed off. Goldie had fallen asleep again, but his breathing was quick, his ears twitching with every creak in the floor. That night, Hank locked every door. He reinforced the windows with boards, hammered nails into the back entrance, and moved Goldie's bedding to his own room. Clara stayed on the couch, her recorder and notepad beside her head like a sword and shield. Lynn Walters dropped by the next morning. She wore a windbreaker with faded police patches, her salt and pepper hair tied back into a tight bun. When she saw the crate and the syringe, her expression darkened. "That's enough," she said. "They're escalating. They're panicked." "You think they'll try again?" Hank asked. "They already did." Later, Clara sat at the table, typing an encrypted report into her laptop. Hank watched her work, one hand resting on Goldie's back. The pup leaned into him without hesitation. "You're not just a reporter, are you?" he asked. Clara didn't look up. "No, I used to be something else. Investigative task force, city-funded. We disbanded when funding was cut. I didn't stop." Hank nodded. "Did you lose someone?" "My sister. She was a vet. Found out too much about where her clinic's donated dogs were ending up. She was careful. Not careful enough." "I'm sorry," he said. Clara finally looked at him. "Me too." There was a long silence between them. That afternoon, Hank took Goldie for a walk, staying close to alley edges, eyes scanning every parked vehicle. They walked past a park where children played. Goldie perked up, ears twitching at the laughter, but stayed close to Hank's boots. Hank knelt, one hand on Goldie's collar. "You're not going anywhere, buddy. Not unless it's with me." In his eyes was something hardened, not fear, but purpose. Not desperation, but conviction. He had spent most of his life running from people, from mistakes, from memories. But now, for the first time in years, he had someone to protect. And he would die before he let them take Goldie. The wind that morning was sharper than usual, curling through the cracks of Hank's porch boards and carrying a salt-heavy breath from the bay. Hank stood outside with a mug of coffee gone cold in his hand, eyes fixed on the far end of the alley. Goldie sat beside him, tail still, not wagging, just watching. It had been 3 days since the attempted kidnapping. Clara had gone temporarily underground to finish compiling evidence. Lynn checked in twice daily. Still, Hank couldn't shake the feeling that they were being circled, not just by shadows, but by someone who knew the shadows intimately. That someone made himself known not long after sunset. The knock at the back door was soft, just 3 taps, not urgent, not hesitant. Hank opened it slow, bat in hand, and found a man standing just beyond the threshold. He was in his early 50s, maybe younger, though his face carried the weight of age accelerated by guilt. He was built stocky, with a thick chest and a broad frame that once spoke of strength, now softened by time. His beard was patchy, more gray than black, and he wore a dark windbreaker that smelled faintly of gasoline and old sweat. The man raised his hands. "I'm not here to hurt you. I used to work for them." Hank didn't lower the bat. "My name's Ray Cordero. I was a logistics supervisor, security detail. I helped move the dogs." Goldie growled softly behind Hank, more confused than afraid. Ray exhaled. "I followed you the night you saved him, not to stop you, to see if you'd keep him alive." Hank narrowed his eyes. "You the one left meat in the alley?" "No, that wasn't me. That was them. I'm not one of them anymore. I left 6 months ago, when I saw what they were doing to the 5th dog." He stepped forward just enough to reach into his coat pocket, slowly, and pulled out a flash drive. "This has everything: schedules, injections, orders from upper management, the real funding trail, names. Not just Erebos, the parent company, Levantra Pharma. Big name, global reach. They bankroll Erebos to run illegal trials they can't afford to be linked to." He held out the drive. "I've been carrying this for months, didn't know what to do with it. Figured I was already dead if I tried, but then I saw you, saw the dog survive, and I thought, maybe this is what redemption looks like." Hank didn't move. "Why give it to me?" Ray looked down. "Because you saved him, and you didn't have to. Eventually, Hank stepped forward and took the drive. His hands were steady. "I'll need a copy of your ID," he muttered. "And if you're lying—" "I'm not," Ray interrupted, his voice low. "But I understand." They sat inside. Goldie sat between them, not growling anymore, but wary. Ray sipped the instant coffee Clara had left behind. "We used to think it was harmless, just stress tests, monitoring reactions. Then they started changing the drugs, watching for thresholds, seeing how much trauma an animal could endure before shutting down. When one of them died, they laughed, said it was within margin. The fifth one, he fought like hell, bit a handler, broke 2 teeth trying to claw out of the kennel." He looked down at Goldie. "I think it's him. I remember the eyes." Hank said nothing. Clara returned the next morning, called in from a borrowed burner, after Hank used a payphone to summon her. She looked exhausted, eyes ringed with fatigue, her clothes layered and damp from fog. When she saw Ray, her hand instinctively went to her pocket. "It's okay," Hank said. "He brought this." He handed her the flash drive. Clara looked at it for a long time, then tucked it into a lead-lined pouch inside her bag. Ray stood. "I don't want immunity. I don't want to run. Just do something with it." "I will," Clara promised, and not quietly. He left without further word. Clara turned to Hank. "Do you believe him?" He knew things he shouldn't, and he didn't ask for anything in return. She nodded. "Then we go public." Over the next 2 days, Clara stayed close, coordinating with encrypted cloud servers, uploading parts of the data in case something happened. Lynn arranged for the flash drive to be backed up in 2 locations, one in Sacramento, one in Oregon. Goldie never left Hank's side. He was walking stronger now, ears perked, tail always swishing gently like he knew something was finally shifting. The air in the house had changed. Less fear, more readiness. That night, Hank stood by the window again. The alley was quiet. The wind had died down, and for the first time, the darkness didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a wall, one they were finally about to break through. They didn't break the story quietly. Clara Monroe didn't believe in subtlety when lives were at stake. She called in every favor she had, activated every dormant contact, and by the end of the week, the truth had a title in bold letters splashed across the digital front page of the Bay Sentinel, San Francisco's most resilient investigative outlet. Thrown from a bridge, the puppy who survived, and the horror he escaped. The article included the grainy photograph of Goldie nestled under Hank's porch, alongside excerpts from the flash drive, clinical trial logs, erased registry files, and budget spreadsheets linking Levantra Pharma to the now exposed Erebos Behavioral Facility. Clara's voice guided the reader through the nightmare, how puppies were injected, observed, discarded, how 4 others died silently, and how the 5th one, labeled Subject 5, had survived long enough to find something more powerful than data. A man who didn't look away. Within hours, the story went viral. Within days, it was international. Local stations replayed drone shots of Pier 26, the crumbling dock outside Hank's duplex, overlaid with headlines like, "Former junk collector becomes voice for abused animals," and "River workers' heroism uncovers corporate horror." Goldie, who once trembled at loud noises, now appeared in photographs beside Hank, wearing a new collar and a vest marked "Survivor." Hank didn't ask for the attention. He didn't shave, didn't change his flannel. When the first reporter knocked, he refused to speak. But Clara convinced him, if not for himself, then for the dogs who never made it out. And so, on a damp Tuesday morning, Hank Rowley sat stiffly on a studio chair inside KFRM Bay News, a local affiliate with fluorescent lights and too much makeup powder. He wore his cleanest jacket, which still smelled faintly of diesel and old rope. Goldie sat in his lap, calm and quiet, tail curled around his feet like a sleeping fern. The host was Maya Beltran, a woman in her early 40s with shoulder-length black hair, a sleek emerald blouse, and a warmth that felt practiced but sincere. She spoke with the cadence of someone used to delivering tragedy in digestible sound bites. But when she saw Goldie, something shifted in her eyes. "So, Hank," she began, "you've worked the river for over a decade. You find scrap. You collect trash. But this was different." Hank cleared his throat. "Wasn't no different to me. I found something someone else threw away. Just this time, It breathed. Maya smiled softly. You didn't just rescue Goldie. You uncovered a network that had hidden beneath our city for years. How does it feel, knowing your name is now tied to something so big? I didn't do it for a name. I did it because someone needed help, and because nobody else was going to do it. The comment resonated. That clip alone racked up over 6 million views in 2 days. Clara kept working behind the scenes, consulting with legal teams, providing anonymous sources with protection. Ray Cordero, the former transport officer, agreed to testify under a sealed deal. He was last seen entering a federal safe house just outside Santa Rosa. Meanwhile, Hank's life transformed whether he wanted it to or not. Children mailed hand-drawn pictures of Goldie. Retirees sent thank you cards. A stranger dropped off a brand new kayak with a red bow and no note. Offers came in from animal welfare organizations, influencers, even morning shows in New York. He declined all of them. But when a local middle school invited him to speak, he said yes. Not because he liked public speaking, but because the teacher had written something that stuck. Many of our kids have never seen a man do something brave without expecting anything in return. At the assembly, Hank stood before a room of fidgeting teenagers and spoke plainly. He didn't preach. He didn't dramatize. Sometimes, he said, you're the only one who notices something's wrong, and you think, maybe someone else will step in. Someone smarter, braver, but no one comes. And if you don't move, then nobody does. The applause was quiet, but honest. That night, back at the dock, Clara and Hank sat on his porch. Goldie lay between them, snoring gently, his head resting on Clara's boot. They offered me a column, Clara said, monthly piece, investigative ethics. I said I'd only do it if they fund a grant for young journalists who want to cover animal welfare. Hank sipped from a chipped mug. Good. What about you? She asked. You planning to stay here? Hank looked out at the bay. It was quiet now. No watchers, no threats, just water and wind. Got nowhere else to go, he said, then paused. But maybe I'll start hauling more than just garbage. Maybe I'll find the things nobody else wants to see. Clara smiled. You already do. The courthouse stood like a monolith of washed stone and reinforced silence, nestled between government offices and rows of protesters. It was early spring in San Francisco, still gray, still damp. But that morning, sunlight broke through for the first time in days, catching the courthouse windows and sending bright spears of light across the marble steps. Hank adjusted his collar and looked down at Goldie. The pup, now nearly 5 months old, had grown taller, his once wobbly legs now steady and sure. His fur had filled out into a thick golden coat, and his eyes were deeper now. Not just intelligent, but almost wise. He wore a soft blue vest stitched with the word witness, which Clara had insisted on. Do dogs usually testify? Hank had asked when she handed him the vest. Not with words, she replied, but trust me, he says enough just by being there. Inside, the federal courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. Rows of people in suits murmured behind notepads. Cameras weren't allowed, but sketches were. A slim woman with long silver hair and angular features sat near the front row, sketching fiercely into a leather-bound journal. Her name was Yvette Cray, a well-known courtroom artist who never spoke more than necessary, and whose drawings had been featured on every national news station since the trial was announced. At the bench presided Judge Wallace Baring, a man in his late 60s with liver-spotted hands and sharp gray eyebrows that met in a permanent frown. He was known across the West Coast as a stern but fair presence, with a reputation for shutting down theatrics and delivering rulings that left little room for interpretation. At the defense table sat 3 men in tailored suits. They looked like stockbrokers, not criminals. One of them, Bryce Kettering, was the CEO of Levantra Pharma, a man with clean features, a neatly trimmed beard, and the air of someone who had never once scrubbed his own kitchen floor. He didn't look toward Hank. He didn't look at Goldie. He only leaned toward his lawyer and whispered when prompted. Hank took the stand on the second day. He was not polished. His voice cracked at first, his eyes shifting toward the bailiff, then back to the jury. But when asked to describe what happened under the bridge, when prompted to recount the moment Goldie hit the water, something inside him steadied. I saw him fall, Hank said, and I thought, that's it, that's death. But when I pulled him out, he didn't fight me. He just held on. as if he knew someone was coming. The prosecutor, Daniel Arlen, a dark-skinned man in his early 40s with close-cropped hair and a soft Texas accent, paced slowly in front of the jury. "And you found what on the dog?" "A collar with a number, 5, and later they found his chip, registered to Erebos, under a false research label." Arlen nodded. "Mr. Rowley, have you ever seen what hope looks like in the shape of a dog?" The courtroom hushed. "Yes," Hank said simply, his voice low, "every time he breathes." Clara testified next. She stood in a charcoal blazer, her hair pinned back, a copy of her article submitted into evidence. Her tone was sharp, articulate, relentless. "I investigated these companies for over a year," she said. "They didn't just test on dogs, they concealed it. They funneled funds through dummy clinics, falsified records, and terminated animals when results weren't useful. Goldie was never meant to leave that lab. He's alive because someone threw him away, not because they cared." The defense argued procedural gray areas, questioned the chain of custody on the flash drive, even attempted to cast doubt on Ray Cordero's testimony. Though Ray himself, now visibly shaken and dressed in court-issued gray, sat quietly in the gallery under witness protection. But the prosecution had video clips, lab footage, voice recordings, emails, and they had Goldie. Each day he sat beside Hank at the edge of the courtroom, quiet, alert, tail sometimes thumping when a witness passed. He never barked, he never whined. His presence, gentle but steady, became the center of the case. Reporters started calling him the heart of the trial. Children sent letters to the courthouse addressed to Goldie. Some adults left flowers outside the courtroom steps. A Vietnam veteran drove from Reno just to stand silently outside with a hand-painted sign that read, "To the one who survived, for the rest who didn't." On the final day of testimony, the prosecutor concluded, "You can't put a price on life, but they did. They put a number on this dog, 5, just a digit, just a unit in a cruel experiment. But now he has a name, he has a voice, and today he speaks through us." When the jury returned their verdict, it was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. After the sentencing, Hank remained seated in the courtroom. Most had left. Even Clara had stepped outside to take a call from a national outlet. Goldie was curled at his feet, resting his head on one paw. Judge Bering descended from the bench and walked quietly toward Hank. He was rarely informal. Today, he made an exception. "Mr. Rowley," he said, "you may not think yourself a hero, but this court disagrees." Hank looked up, surprised. "I've seen men save buildings, governments, companies, but rarely do they save something so small and give it back to the world bigger than it was before." Then he turned, his robe sweeping quietly behind him. The sun rose golden and steady over Pier 26, casting long shadows from the aging cranes and broken freight lines. But the old dock had a new rhythm now. Where there had once been silence and the soft lapping of brackish water, there was the bark of dogs, the clatter of food bowls, and the laughter of volunteers. Hank Rowley stood beneath a hand-painted wooden sign that arched above the newly fenced property, Harbor Haven Animal Rescue. It was simple, the lettering uneven. Clara had insisted it stay that way. "People trust crooked letters more than slick ones," she'd said. It had taken nearly a year of planning, fundraising, and more legal permits than Hank thought the city even knew how to print. Clara had coordinated the paperwork. Lynn had pulled in favors from her contacts, and the donations, well, those never stopped coming. Some had arrived in envelopes with hearts drawn in crayon, some in checks signed by anonymous hands, all because of Goldie. Goldie now stood tall beside Hank, a year and 2 weeks old, his coat gleaming in the sunlight, eyes alert and gentle. He was larger now, nearly 70 pounds, with a muscular build and a calm demeanor that had made him a natural therapy dog for the injured rescues. Every morning, he greeted the new arrivals, limping mutts, frightened puppies, dogs rescued from fighting rings or back alley crates, with a nudge of the nose and a soft tail wag. He was more than a symbol, he was a healer. The center had 5 kennels, 2 converted shipping containers for offices, and a shaded enclosure with a low ramp for senior dogs. A woman named Sophie Tran, a Vietnamese-American vet tech in her early 30s with short spiky hair and a sarcastic sense of humor, had volunteered to run the medical corner. Sophie had once worked at a city-run shelter where she said too many good dogs were put down because someone didn't feel like caring. She called Hank Captain Rust, and he didn't correct her. That afternoon, the gate buzzer rang. Hank stepped out from the tool shed where he'd been fixing a cracked water dish and wiped his hands on a towel. Goldie followed him, ears perked. At the gate stood a man in his mid-30s, tall, clean-cut, with short sandy blonde hair and a familiar crease between his brows. In his arms was a young girl, no more than 5, with messy curls and wide hazel eyes. She clutched a stuffed raccoon and held it like armor. The man was Hank's son, Daniel Rowley. They hadn't seen each other in 17 years. Daniel's face held years of distance, like a man climbing a hill unsure what waited at the top, but his voice was steady when he said, "Hey, Dad." Hank didn't speak at first, just looked. The weight of memory pressed against his ribs. Daniel had been 10 the last time they stood eye to eye. Back then, Hank had shouted too much, drank too often, pushed away when he should have held on. Now he only said, "You look like your mother?" Daniel nodded. "Yeah, she used to say that too." They stood there for a moment longer. The girl squirmed slightly in his arms. Daniel looked down at her, then back up. "This is Lila, your granddaughter." Hank blinked once. Goldie stepped forward and sniffed the air. Lila looked at the dog, then at Hank. "He's pretty," she whispered. "His name's Goldie," Hank said, voice catching. "He's the one who started all of this." Daniel glanced around the yard. "I've seen the videos, read the stories. I didn't know how to call you after everything. But then Lila asked me what a hero was last week, and your face came to mind." They sat on the back porch, the old wooden steps newly sanded, but still creaking under weight. Lila ran after Goldie, laughing, the dog gentle and patient with every clumsy hug and pulled ear. Daniel handed Hank a photo, one of Margot, taken in the last year of her life. "She saw the news, said she hoped you'd found peace." "I didn't," Hank said softly, "but I found purpose. It's more durable." They sat in silence for a while. Then Daniel said, "You think there's room here for a volunteer?" Hank smiled. "You good with poop?" "I have a 5-year-old. They both laughed, quiet, honest, awkward, but healing. As the sun dipped over the bay, casting the rescue yard in golden light, Hank watched his granddaughter curl beside Goldie in the grass, her small hands tangled in his fur. This wasn't how he thought life would end, but maybe it wasn't ending. Maybe it was just opening its hands in a different way. Messier, more honest. Some people got second chances. Others had to build them with their own hands, out of rust and water and a dog that should have died, but didn't. The heart never rusts, it just waits. Sometimes, the smallest lives carry the loudest prayers. Goldie wasn't born to be a symbol. He wasn't meant to be famous. He was just a puppy, thrown away like trash, like he didn't matter. But the moment he hit that water, something unseen stirred. A hand didn't just reach down from a boat. Maybe, just maybe, it reached down from heaven. Because no science can explain how a broken man, drifting through life, became the father to a creature that changed the world. No logic can map how rust became gold, how silence became testimony, and how a bridge, once just metal and bolts, became the place where a miracle began. God doesn't always move mountains. Sometimes he sends a dog. Sometimes he saves us through what we choose to save. So, if you're watching this, if your heart feels heavy or your home feels cold, remember, redemption doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs someone to see and someone to stay. Before you go, let me ask you, have you ever witnessed a quiet miracle? Leave a comment below and share your story. And if you believe every creature, no matter how small, deserves a second chance, hit that subscribe button. Share this story. Let it touch someone else who might be struggling. And may God bless every soul who chooses to care when no one else will. Comment, Amen, if you believe even one act of love can change the world.